know me. Know how I earn a living. This shark, swallow you whole. I value my neck a lot more than $3,000, Chief. Find him for 3, but I'll catch him and kill him for 10. $10,000 for me by myself. For that you get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
Mr. Vaughn, I pulled a tooth the size of a shot glass out of the wrecked hull of the boat out there, and it was the tooth of a great white.
A what?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Love to prove that, wouldn't you? Get your name into the National Geographic.
No, I'm not saying that this is not the shark. It probably is, Martin. It probably is. It's a man-eater. It's extremely rare for these waters. But the fact is that the bite radius on this animal is different than the wounds on the victim. Get out of that boat!
Well, this is not a boat accident. There wasn't any propeller. There wasn't any coral reef. And it wasn't Jack the Ripper.
It was a shark.
I'll never put on that ice jacket again.
In Hollywood mourning the passing of an actress who was part of an iconic scene in one of the top grossing films of all time. She passed away this weekend at her home in Ventura. Backlinie was a stunt person and actor sought out by director Steven Spielberg for the movie's opening scene. He said he needed someone who was great in the water and could withstand a whole lot of shaking to set up the terror that was to come. Susan Backlinie was 77 years old.
And welcome back to another episode of the Jaws Obsession, episode 77, Farewell, Susan. Thank you very much for returning to this next episode where we are here to share with you, prove to you, convince you, or remind you that Jaws is the greatest movie of all time. With the regretful news 2 weeks ago, Susan Backlinie has passed away, and it is most important to recognize not only her contribution to Jaws, but what did Susan Backlinie represent going forward and into cinema as a whole. I'm hoping to get some thoughts out about that as we go through a few articles remembering Susan and the life that she led. I wanted to start reading about Susan in order to best summarize what Susan Backlinie meant to the realm of cinema. As always, you can go to our show notes and see these articles over at our Telegram channel at JawsOB. I will be posting links to these articles that I'll be referencing as well as some of the videos here. First article that we have is from the Vineyard Gazette. Susan Backlinie swam into film history as the first Jaws victim by Louisa Hofstadter. And this was from May 14th, 2024. This is the Vineyard Gazette reporting. 50 summers ago, 27-year-old stuntwoman Susan Backlinie plunged into the waters off Cow Bay on a 3-day contract with Universal Studios to play the doomed skinny dipper Chrissie Watkins in Jaws. For her brief but horrifying performance as the killer shark's first victim, Miss Backlinie, who died May 11th at 77 years old, became an enduring screen icon after the movie was released in 1975. Jaws fans lined up for autographs when Mrs. Backlinie returned to the Vineyard for the movie's 30th anniversary in 2005. Quote, "I have been completely surprised by the fans' reactions. It's just amazing," she told the Gazette at the celebratory clam bake in 2005. "Susan was an incredibly nice person when I spoke with her," recalled Matt Taylor this week. Mr. Taylor is the author of the illustrated oral history book, Jaws Memories from Martha's Vineyard. Miss Backlinie made a searing impression on generations of Jaws viewers with just 2 scenes and almost no dialogue. She was a champion swimmer in high school who went on to perform underwater as one of the famed mermaids at Florida's Weeki Wachee Springs State Park in the mid-1960s. Director Steven Spielberg told interviewer Laurent Bouzereau in the 2023 book Spielberg, The First 10 Years, that he wanted a stunt woman for the role of Chrissie because of the physically demanding special effects that would make it look as if she was being eaten alive. I needed somebody who was great in the water, who knew water ballet, and knew how to endure what I imagined was going to be a whole lot of violent shaking. So I went to stunts to find her, and Susan was up for the challenge. Appearing at the beach party that opens the movie, Miss Backlinie is seen flirting with Islander Jonathan Filley, who was 19 at the time, before leading him on a dash along South Beach, shedding her clothes and plunging into the dark Atlantic while he collapses drunkenly on the sand. Jonathan Filley recalls, "We shot the beach party a few days later. We shot the scene where she was dragged around. She was terrific. She was very professional. She showed up with her boyfriend, some guy named Monty Cox, who was an animal trainer and was never more than 3 feet away from her. He was very protective," Mr. Filley recalled. Miss Backlinie later told interviewers that her second scene, shot in the calmer waters of Cow Bay, required a grueling series of dawn-to-dusk shoots. A cinematic technique called day for night created the effect of nighttime, Mr. Taylor told the Gazette. To simulate the shark attack, Miss Backlinie wore a harness attached by 2 points to a running wire that was pulled back and forth by the 2 teams of crew members, including Mr. Spielberg, who had to be careful not to yank her in both directions at once. Another wire led to the bottom of the bay to drag Miss Backlinie underwater as if in the grip of the killer shark. "It was quite a rig," said Mr. Filley, who went on to become an Emmy-winning television and film producer. Working with the veteran film editor Verna Fields, Mr. Spielberg turned Miss Backlinie's scene into a horror classic. Over 50 years, has terrified untold numbers of viewers who still won't swim at night or at all. The director himself may be among them, as he said, "I don't go into the water anymore." So we have one article here. Susan passed away on May 11th, 2024, at the age of 77. What we're seeing here is that she was a stunt woman. She was never an actress first. It was more of a stunt woman that was needed for the role, for the performance. Steven Spielberg knew that this was going to be classified as a stunt, and that's what we have here in this article. That they're citing the book, they're citing 2 books, Jaws Memories of Martha's Vineyard, which we're going to read from in a little bit here, by Matt Taylor. And then they're also citing the Spielberg, The First 10 Years, the 2023 book that recently came out, that Spielberg is saying from the get-go that this was going to be a stunt performance before over an acting performance. So we have to keep that in mind as we move forward. So let's move to the second article that we have. This is going to be from the Palm Beach Post, Remembering Forest Hill High grad who went on to be a stunt woman and Jaws' first victim, by Sonia Eisger, Palm Beach Post reporter. This was from May 14th, 2024. They have an editor's note here. The editor's note reads, "The Forest Hill High graduate, once nationally ranked swimmer, and the stunt woman famous for being Jaws' first victim, Susan Backlinie, has died at the age of 77. The New York Times is among the news outlets that have confirmed she died from a heart attack suffered Saturday, May 11th, at her home in California. Many of the national outlets, when reporting her death, have turned to an interview Backlinie gave to the Palm Beach Post on the 40th anniversary of the movie Jaws in 2015. The following is the story as originally published. So we're going to go into this story, the originally published story by Stacy Sturrock, because there's some details coming up here that are very interesting. We have to realize the amount of danger and risk to injury that Susan put herself in order to give us this extremely convincing performance that opens up Jaws. We're going to add to some of those details here in this article. They write, when Steven Spielberg began casting Jaws in early 1974, he envisioned a New York City actress for the role of the skinny dipper killed in the opening minutes of the movie. So there was originally a New York City actress for the role, but what would become an iconic role in the summer blockbuster that opened up on June 20th, 1975, would go to a West Palm Beach-bred stunt woman who seemed born to play the part. Her name was Susan Backlinie, and she was not only tall, blonde, and curvaceous, but more importantly, a nationally ranked swimmer who'd performed as a mermaid and an animal trainer after graduating from Forest Hill High School in 1964. Susan is quoted here as saying, "The first thing Spielberg said to me was, when your scene is done, I want everyone under the seats with the popcorn and the bubblegum." So I think we did that. So this article references Spielberg as starting to when he first envisioned the role, obviously you need an actress to play Chrissie Watkins. But then in the last article, he says there was also going to be a lot of violent shaking, and so we needed a stunt woman. What we're going to see now is the person that decided to combine the two roles was Susan herself, and that's how she lands the job. She actually goes to Steven Spielberg and says, let me be the actress and the stunt woman, because traditionally they would have a actress and then they would cut to a distance scene and you would see a stunt woman performing the stunts, and then you go back to the actress in a close-up. But not here. Not here. That's not what happened with this performance by Susan. So let me continue with the article here. The article continues on. It says, a native of Washington, D.C., Backlinie, then Susan Myers, moved to West Palm Beach at the age of 10 and grew up splashing in the Palm Beach County surf and logging mile after mile in local pools. At Forest Hill High, where she was a cheerleader and a state freestyle champion, her classmates voted her most athletic. So she was most athletic in her class, and she was a freestyle swimming champion. She attended nursing school for a year, but discovered it wasn't for her. I needed something more, quote, I needed something more athletic and more outdoorsy, she says. She swam as a mermaid at the Weeki Wachee Springs on Florida's west coast and worked with the wild animals at Ivan Torres Studios, the Miami facility made famous by Flipper. On a national tour with Ivan Torres, she shared the stage with Gentle Ben, the bear, Judy the chimp, and Clarence the cross-eyed lion. When Ivan Torres closed, Backlinie relocated to California with Africa USA and was shooting on location with a tiger in Canada when the Jaws team reached out to her. She met Spielberg in the spring of 1974 and made her pitch. Quote, I said, if you use me, you could get close-ups during the stunt itself. If you use an actress, she'll have to hide her face. Spielberg would soon learn that Backlinie was more at home in the water than his notoriously glitchy mechanical shark. In the Biography Channel's Jaws: The Inside Story documentary, Spielberg calls Backlinie's sequence one of the most dangerous stunts he's ever directed. She was actually being tugged left and right by 10 men on one rope and 10 men on the other back to the shore, and that's what caused her to move like that. So we have right here, Spielberg is quoted from the Jaws: The Inside Story documentary that Backlinie's sequence was, quote, one of the most dangerous stunts he's ever directed. Okay, let's keep that all in mind right there. Backlinie was wearing a pair of cut-off jeans that had metal plates stitched into the sides. Cables were attached to each plate, putting the stunt woman at the center of a violent tug of war. Quote, as I would feel my hips go to one side, I would throw my arms in the opposite direction as hard as I could, she says. I also had a pair of fins on because when they would pull me to one side, I would go under, so I had to kick with all my strength to stay above the water. It took a lot of energy, but I was in pretty good shape back then. Between takes, Spielberg hung off an inner tube next to Backlinie, and he was at her side when she re-recorded her screams in the studio. Quote, he sat me in a chair with a bassinet in my lap, and he poured water down my throat, she says. Richard Dreyfuss told someone, quote, you know she was getting waterboarded. So that is very interesting right there. Even the not only was the danger in the water sequence of the filming, but to record her screams, they actually waterboarded her, where they poured water down her throat while she was screaming. And that's why you get that violent gurgling and that very intense, realistic. That all adds to the realism of the moment. And we have to realize that is extremely important right there. The danger, it's not just a danger, the discomfort and the willingness to do whatever it took for the authenticity of the performance. And that is what Susan Backlinie brought to this equation. It's extremely remarkable. So even with recording the screams, with the water getting poured down her throat, everything was for the performance. It didn't seem like there was any self-preservation that was going on. The article finishes up here. It says, Backlinie reprised her Jaws work for laughs in 1941, Spielberg's 1979 war parody, when she played a skinny dipper surprised by a Japanese submarine. She retired from stunt work in the mid-1980s, but still appears at movie conventions. She's quoted as saying, one of the main comments I get from everybody is, you know you kept me out of the water. Backlinie, however, never feared the ocean or its creatures. She swam with sharks off the coast of Australia and enjoyed scuba diving for many years. So it didn't really bother me, but I was always aware. And that was the Palm Beach post-reporting on Susan Backlinie passing on May 11th, 2024 at the age of 77. Our takeaway right there is more details in that Spielberg definitely considers this one of the most dangerous stunts he's ever directed. Spielberg is a very prolific director. For him to make that statement, that means something. And I feel that is being left out as Susan is remembered going forward. We really have to look at this stand back and just look at her contribution here. How will Susan be remembered as we go forward into the next 50 years? So I'm going to go back to Matt Taylor's book here, Memories from Martha's Vineyard, which is what was quoted earlier in the Vineyard Gazette article. Very interesting what some of the details that we have here with Matt Taylor. He compiled some shooting schedules from the set of Jaws. He actually narrows it down here. The film's opening bonfire scene shot on the evening of June 27th, 1974, which featured Hollywood stuntwoman Susan Backlinie as shark victim number 1, Chrissie Watkins. For the scene, Jonathan Filley reprised his role as Tom Cassidy, who is led by the enticing Chrissie away from the fire for an evening swim. In her final performance as Chrissie, Backlinie was filming on Cow Bay, June 29th. June 29th is what he was able to decipher, that was when there was a 3-day shoot. There was a 3-day shoot there. So she was filming on the 27th, 28th, and the final sequence was the 29th on Cow Bay with the violent tugging back and forth. June the 29th, 1974. So that's a date that we're going to have to remember going forward. Susan's quoted here. She has a lengthy quote here, and I want to read this because this is very important to highlight the contributions of all the people that were able to come together to make Jaws the special movie that it is. And Susan, she sums up her history a little bit here. She says, "I specialized in stunt work involving water and wild animals, things actors generally stay away from because they're too dangerous. Lions, bears, chimps, all the exotics. I was hired for the part of Chrissie because I could do the stunt work and because I was willing to take my clothes off, something I wasn't asked to do for the interview and appreciated." That's another aspect, is that she actually put herself in the most vulnerable position for the authenticity of this performance. Peter Benchley wrote the beginning the beginning of Jaws. The novel opens up with the attack on Chrissie Watkins. So it was only natural that the movie would open up with the attack because everybody remembers that first chapter of the novel of Jaws. For Chrissie to be in the most vulnerable position, without any clothes, in the freezing cold water, because they're there before the 4th of July. So we all know that the waters off Amity and in that area are very cold. The waters are still uncomfortably cold. So Susan would put herself into an extremely vulnerable position for the authenticity of the opening of Jaws. Quote, "For the attack, they put a pair of cut-off Levi's on me that were attached to cables. The cables were connected to pilings about 25 yards from shore. They then ran all the way back to the beach, basically a pulley system. I'd get in the water between the pilings, and the guys on the beach would run the cables back and forth in the sand, and that's what pulled me and gave the effects of being in the shark's mouth. Whichever way I was being pulled, I'd throw my arms over my head in the opposite direction and scream as loudly as I could. The guys pulling the lines on the beach did most of the work, which was critical, because if they pulled too far, they dragged me right out of the frame. I wore flippers, not only to give me more control, but because Steven wanted me as far out of the water as I could get. I was kicking like crazy to stay on the surface and maintain the height he wanted while the crew jerked me around. For most of the scene, Steven and the camera crew were right in the water with me. They used the camera box with the lens that was part in the water and part out. Between shots, I'd just hang out on an inner tube. There have been rumors that I broke my ribs, but that didn't happen. Someone on the crew jerked one of the cables a bit too hard, and I wrenched my back. I got back to the hotel, took some aspirin, and got in the tub. That's life in the stunt business. You get aches and pains. She finishes up here. She says, "We mostly shot day for night with a filter on the lens. The only shot we actually filmed at night was the one of me swimming out towards the buoy. That was the only time I was in the water alone without the crew, and I hate that. Ironically, I've never liked being in the water on a dark beach." Who does, right? that was on page 214 from Memories of Martha's Vineyard by Matt Taylor. So we're coming up next month is going to be the 50-year anniversary of her filming these scenes, June 27th to June 29th in Martha's Vineyard as Chrissie Watkins on the South Beach of Amity Island. And in doing that, she would change cinema forever. Now, episode 66, so if we go into the Jaws universe, everyone goes back and listens to episode 66, Chrissie Victimology, we actually did a deep dive into the performance of Susan Backlinie, the unscripted phrases that she's saying while being attacked, the performance, nuanced performances that she was doing even before the attack, that there's a lot more to Chrissie Watkins than we might think. And we broke that down for episode 66, Chrissie Victimology. But for now, what we're going to do is focus on, what we are doing is we're focusing on Susan Backlinie and her contribution here, in that this was technically one of the greatest stunts performed by anyone in cinema history. You have to look at the weight of the moment here. When I make a statement like that, I don't want to say that in a vacuum. I want to back that up with solid evidence that you can actually say that she belongs, that Susan Backlinie's performance of Chrissie Watkins in the attack sequence belongs in the greatest stunt performances in cinema history. So if I can go off on that tangent here, I wanted to go on a definition of what is a stunt performer. If I go to Wikipedia, it says a stunt performer, often called stuntman, stuntwoman, and occasionally stunt person, is a trained professional who performs daring acts, often as a career. Stunt performers usually appear in films or on television, as opposed to a daredevil who performs for a live audience. When they take the place of another actor, they are known as stunt doubles. Okay? A stunt performer is an actor skilled in both choreographing and safely presenting actions on screen that appear to be dangerous, risky, or even deadly. Stunts frequently performed include car crashes, falls from great heights, drags, for example, behind a horse, and the consequences of explosions. So that's the technical definition of a stunt performer, and Chrissie and Susan Backlinie falls right into that category as a stunt performer, stunt woman. So what I did was I wanted to switch over to greatest stunt performers of all time. Now, granted that Susan, her career wasn't as grand. It didn't span decades and decades of movies. There are other stunt performers that have bigger resumes, larger resumes than Susan Backlinie. So number one was Buster Keaton. Number 2, Jeannie Epper. 3, Hal Needham. 4, Jackie Chan. 5, Debbie Evans. Not to make this about top 10 stunt performers, but the number 2 was Jeannie Epper. She's an actress and stunt woman she's been in over 161 movie stunt credits. Romancing the Stone, Kill Bill Volume 2, Wonder Woman, Charlie's Angels. It goes on and on. And what I found interesting is that Jeannie Epper, she passed away the 5th of May, 2024, at the age of 83, a week before Susan passes away. So both of these performers, Jeannie Epper and Susan Backlinie, left us in May of 2024, this month. And still, as we move forward, when we're talking about stunts, that quote by Steven Spielberg is just echoing in the background here. So let's play that quote by Steven Spielberg when he talks about the stunt performance by Susan Backlinie.
The Susan Backlinie effect sequence of being killed by the shark, I still think to this day was one of the most dangerous things that happened.
Susan Backlinie effect sequence is one of the most dangerous things that happened. A direct quote from Steven Spielberg. So what we're looking at here is we now have to cross-reference that over to MSN.com, and I'll post these lists over at the show notes, is the 20 greatest stunts in cinema history and how they were done. So as I look down these lists, we have a lot of different we have a lot of different stunts that are very flashy. We have the motorcycle jump cliff from Mission Impossible, bridge jump in Smokey and the Bandit. We have Charlie Chaplin roller skating on the brink in Modern Times, 1936. The limousine helicopter rescue, True Lies, 1994, with where Arnold is hanging off and pulls Jamie Lee Curtis out of the limousine. The Bourne Ultimatum window jump from 2007. And then as you get into the top 5, the top 10, you have a lot of Jackie Chan stunts. As we know, Jackie Chan was a stuntman, an actor who did a lot, who was famous for doing his own stunts. In Police Story, 1985. You have the Ben-Hur chariot race, 1959. Now, what does Susan's performance, how does that set it apart in that from all of these stunts is that a lot of these were filmed with stunt men or stunt people, and that it's doubling for an actor. A lot of these sequences are great stunts, but are they as iconic and pivotal to the movie as a whole as Susan's attack, as the Chrissie attack sequence was to Jaws? And that's where you have to rank Susan's performance all the way up there in the top 10. It has to be because of if you weigh in all the different columns, if you talk about risk and danger, very high. If you talk about she's actually playing, she is the actress that's playing the character, so it's not like she's looking away from the camera. So she has to play that character as well. Okay, and then you have the factors that go into she has to open up what would be the greatest summer blockbuster at the time. So it has to be extremely convincing. So with those 3 columns, many of these other stunt sequences are very flashy things that go into the movie, but they are not the weight, the dramatic weight, and the gravitas of the moment that Susan actually nailed. She stuck the landing, so to speak, on this performance.
The Susan Backlinie effect sequence of being killed by the shark, I still think to this day was one of the most dangerous things that happened.
He told me, he said, when your scene is finished, I want the people under the chairs with the popcorn and the bubble gum. The cameraman, the assistant cameraman, Steven Spielberg was in the water with me the whole time. And they had a box that was a big black box with the camera in it, and it was half underwater and half above the water. And they kept it right on that level.
You never see the shark, which was by design.
She was actually being tugged left and right by 10 men on one rope and 10 men on the other back to shore. And that's what caused her to move like that.
They attached me with cables and ran cables from the beach all the way out to pilings. And then they just did the jerking back and forth part like that.
Putting the girl on that pulley and having her, just the idea of it was more horrifying than seeing the shark.
If 10 people pulled at the same time, everybody warned me the pure power of people pulling on her body in 2 different directions. You would really hurt her back. So that was a very dangerous thing.
I figured screaming like I was, if something did happen, nobody would know it. Nobody would have known to come help me.
It was so terrifying to see her drag back and forth and then under, that it mesmerized the audience.
The very last shot when I go under, he did the pulling on that because he wanted it just a certain way.
She's praying, and then she comes into a close-up, and then she's gasping for air, and then she's pulled down, and I was on the rope for that last tug.
There you go. I mean, there we have it, is that look at the danger. Even some of the voices in there were Bill Gilmore and Richard Zanuck, one of the producers of Jaws, about how it was terrifying even just watching it happen, and that just the rigging that was involved to get the thrashing was terrifying even them. And what a revelation there. This is all from the making of Jaws, the Inside Story. I'll put a link to this behind-the-scenes feature on our show notes as well, so everyone can go watch that. But then but then we have to let's go back and let's just restate about the what Richard Dreyfuss recalls with the how did they get her audio with the gurgling effect.
Later, they would add the finishing touch.
Susan and Steven were looping the screams, and he had her tilt her head back, and he poured water down her throat while she screamed, which is now known as waterboarding.
There really weren't any boundaries. It was just all out, get the performance as and in the techniques that were used to get the most authentic performance. So I'm calling on everyone who makes these lists, from MSN.com and IMDb.com, whoever makes these greatest stunt performances of all time lists, 20 greatest stunts in cinema history, or the greatest stunt performers, to respectfully include Susan Backlinie. Although her career might have been short, it was extremely powerful. And all you really need is that one of the most powerful performances of all time, her portrayal of Chrissie Watkins and what she had to do in order to commit that to the big screen, to get that onto 35 millimeter film and on the big screen. So everybody revise your lists and make June the 29th, 2024, the 50-year anniversary of Susan's performance in the water to record the attack of Chrissie Watkins. Wouldn't that be special? So what can we do as Jaws fans, as members of the Jaws obsession, as those who are out there? Who could we write to? Who could we talk about? Who could we talk to get a little bit more stunt performance commemoration going on? So Susan's memory is not forgotten. It should be etched in the stone of history going forward. It's very important because remember, this movie never would have worked. Jaws never would have worked if it wasn't for a convincing opening stunt performance sequence with the Chrissie Watkins scene. And it only did work because of the sacrifice and because of the willingness of Susan Backlinie, not only her professional and her championship swimming skills, but her willingness to perform a stunt and also to put herself into compromising situations. Wow. Amazing. When I think of something that's the greatest of all time, I think of the impact on generations going forward, or the impact on the industry as a whole at that time. And it set everything off into a new motion. It set everything into motion. The Friday the 13th movies, the Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, all the slasher films. When Jaws is considered a horror film in some areas, it's really, they point right to the Chrissie Watkins death scene, the performance by Susan Backlinie. And that set everything in motion for those later slasher films in the late 70s and early 80s. So it changed everything. There was a ripple effect, and it can't. So when you talk about greatest stunt performance in history, you have to look at the ripple effect that it leaves, and that's what we have here with Susan Backlinie in Jaws. It has gone down as the stunt performance that has been seen, heard, and remembered in the minds of millions of moviegoers, and will go forward as one of the, if not the greatest stunt performance of all time. And I think that's how we have to start framing this, is that Susan Backlinie is one of the most famous stunt performers of all time. Why? Because I don't know of another stunt that generations, 50 years later, half a century later, everyone knows about Chrissie's attack at the beginning of Jaws. My appeal would be to the stunt performers of America, or the certain groups out there that are in charge of stunts in Hollywood, to, on June the 29th, why don't we recognize this performance, this iconic performance, this which is groundbreaking. Susan was the one that went to Steven Spielberg and said, hire me, and I can be the actress and the stunt performer, and you can actually take the camera and get right up close and do whatever you want, because it's not a stunt double. It is now the stunt performer is the actress. That was the key there. And that was really what we're looking at, is that was Susan Backlinie's idea. That's how she was able to land the job. What we're going to do now is we're going to leave with Susan telling, the audio might not be as clear. This is another interview that was on a YouTube channel by John Athanason when Susan Backlinie was back at Weeki, Wachee Springs State Park in 2011. And we're going to leave with Susan saying of her reasoning why she was best for this role. And with that, we want to bid farewell to Susan Backlinie, who left us May 11th, 2024. But more importantly, she left us with the greatest stunt performance of all time in cinema history. The bravery and the risk and the self-sacrifice that she did back between June 27th and June 29th, 1974, 50 years ago, that echoes throughout time, and it's going to keep going. And she's inspired many of us. With that, we're saying goodbye to Susan. Our prayers go out to her family at this time of loss. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in for this episode 77. Farewell, Susan.
And at the time, Steven wanted an actress to do it. And I sold my part by saying, if you can have somebody do the acting and do the stunt work, you can get close up. The stunt girl doesn't have to keep her head turned away from camera, so it sells better.